What's up, everybody? Welcome to a casual conversation with me, Jeremiah, and James. Hey, James.
What's up, everybody?
Now, if you've been listening to the podcast for only a year or so, you may not know what a casual conversation is, but every once in a while, probably not often enough, James and I get together and talk about something we think is interesting or thought-provoking, and we release it for everybody else. It's in no way related to gaming, really. But they're interesting conversations that we enjoy having with each other, and some of you guys enjoy listening to. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we had one about gaming.
Was it?
It was about gaming in college.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
But side
So
note.
tonight's topic, so it's bad. Normally I would have like some supporting materials here, but I read about this somewhere and I thought it was really interesting. And then I did not save the thing I read. And when I tried to go back and find it again, I couldn't because the name is too generic that when you Google it, I just went through page after page of completely unrelated stuff and then gave up. So unfortunately, I have to do this all off the top of my head from what I remember. So tell me if any of this doesn't make sense. But
So I'm gonna just equate it to movies, because if you think of Interstellar, or you think of even Independence Day, those were kind of the turning points for humanity.
well, I haven't even said the thing yet.
Yeah, but that
okay.
to me that explains it just as.
That's true. Actually, that's a really good point. Okay, so the topic is humanity's great test. And like James alluded to, the rough version of what this means is, like, there's this theory out there that every civilization at some point reaches a test. And sometimes you pass a test, sometimes you fail a test, but over time, the tests become more and more severe to the point where every civilization eventually fails a test, and then they are no more. So James used the example of like Independence Day and Interstellar, from movies. Those make sense. Like aliens show up. If we pass the test at Independence Day, so we get to live. Interstellar, we kill the Earth, and this blight kills the Earth, and we can no longer get food out of it. Do we pass the test of surviving on, in a galaxy far, far away? But looking at practical examples that have happened in, our actual history, that's true of every civilization. Like Rome rises up to great splendor and glory, and then for a variety of reasons can't maintain their empire, withers, and basically dies, even though Rome still exists. Like the Roman Empire is no more.
Right.
Every country that doesn't exist anymore, reached some sort of test they couldn't pass, whether it was a war or some political challenge they weren't able to surmount. What would be some other good examples? A disease that could maybe hit an area and wipe out everybody in it. And those are all civilization based. Like those are all smaller groups of people. So the theory is humanity undergoing a great test? And what have been humanity's great tests up until this point that we've passed? And are we undergoing a great test now that we might not pass? Does that sound fair, James?
Yeah. The examples you mentioned, just take it one step further. Civilizations come and go. Superpowers rise, they fall. But in all those scenarios, humanity lives on. And just the power shifts to somebody else.
Right.
But there's that next step of at what point is it going to affect everybody? So yeah.
Right, like an Independence Day type scenario where countries and politics don't matter so much, and it's humanity facing a test.
Yep.
And of course, plenty of people can make a case that humanity is facing tests now, and that's like great tests. So that's what we want to talk about. So what would be some good historical ones? So Rome is one.
Well, I mean, if you want to go really far back, different during the Ice Age, humanity was almost completely wiped out. It went from an exponentially growing to going back down to I think thousands of humans on the planet.
And why did we survive that great test?
I think I just got lucky, honestly.
Luck. I mean, do we have fire?
I'm sure. I think so. I don't know.
I mean, so I'm really like.
I think it was maybe more migration than anything.
Okay.
but those that were in the more extreme, not even extreme, but more extreme than, say, being in Africa, which is closer to, the equator. Well, parts of it are, they're more likely to survive than, say, going into more Europe or, further west. East, not west. The west is the ocean. They weren't seafaring then. I think, it's crazy that within the last couple hundred years, and of course we focus on American history because, Jeremiah and I are Americans, and we took U.S. history as our primary histories. I mean, I took other type of historical classes, but, generally you learn the most about the country.
Yeah.
We've had quite a few wars in the last few hundred years. I don't think we came to close to being extinct during, the Civil War or, the Revolution or, dealing with things like slavery. But when we got to some of the bigger wars like World War I and World War II, that was a defining moment where we now have the capability not only to launch these mass scale wars across the globe because of mobilization of, powered boats and planes, but we also have weapons that are capable of essentially running our planet. So I think that was one of the historical, wow, from that period forward, from World War II at least, up until, up through the Cold War, we at any point could have pushed tensions too quickly or too fast, or to a point where we could have wiped out a good portion of our civilization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually, that's two of the things you mentioned are things I can't remember where I read this, and this is kind of driving me nuts. Two things that were brought up. One was the American Civil War. That might have been a test. You could consider that to be a test that America passed. Many countries would not have most countries did not rise to the size and power the United States did as quickly as the United States did. And then most of them did not get involved into giant civil wars like the United States did over very, very serious issues. And then, for the most part, end it and go back to being one country. And obviously that's a very, very simplified view of history, but viewing it in this context, that can be seen as a test we passed. And then another one, which I think is probably one of the easiest to point to, is, after World War II, when we finally had weapons capable of doing exponentially more damage than mankind was ever capable of before. There was a lot of pressure in the United States government to use those weapons while we were the only people who had them, and to quickly scramble our way to the top of the pile, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think it could be seen as humanity, not just America, but humanity passed that test of we all got, or a lot of the superpowers got nuclear weapons fairly quickly, and so far have not used them on each other again.
So would you say we've passed that, or we just haven't failed yet?
We haven't failed it yet, and see, that's an important thing. So I think we definitely passed the test of the 5 or 6 years, maybe the 10 years after World War II. That was a very different time than what we're in now, because that was when America was the nuclear superpower,
right.
And we probably could have gotten away with nuking a bunch of other countries if we wanted to.
For that short period of time.
Right,
but when you fast forward to the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Right. So that's a test we passed. And then the Cuban Missile Crisis is one that we just barely passed.
I mean, that literally being minutes from, because it's not going to be, we get attacked and, oh no, we deal with the devastation and the world gets on the side of us and fights the other people. If we get in a scenario where we're going against another nuclear country and they're not necessarily as powerful as us, but are powerful enough to wipe us out, we're going to start trying to wipe them out first. It's not going to be let's wait and let's try to negotiate at this point.
Right.
Let's get ours out faster so maybe we can survive.
Which I think people could make a case that we are maybe undergoing one of those tests right now with North Korea. Or North Korea is undergoing a great test as a country.
Yeah.
Of, are they going to be able to actually negotiate their way? Since, they've made nuclear threats for years, but they seem closer than they've ever been. to actually being a nuclear superpower, are they going to pass the test of scrambling up to stand next to the rest of the world's elite countries? That seems to be what they want to do. But are they actually going to do that?
I don't think they'll ever financially be able to compete with any of the other nuclear powers.
I don't either.
Maybe enough to cause some damage to
right.
surrounding countries, but
having that power means you skip most of the line.
Right.
And like they make themselves a major player. And do they pass that test, and are they able to use that to negotiate their way into a better position in the world? And does the rest of the world pass the test of having a country that, if you're being really callous, you could say they're a nuisance. If you're being like a little more fatalistic, you can say they are extremely dangerous. And do we pass the test of trying to negotiate with them before we just take them out? And like you said before, maybe that's a test we've passed so far, but maybe not forever.
Right.
And I think that's really interesting in a morbid way, that you can pass a test, like looking at it through the frame of humanity undergoing these great tests. You can pass them for a while, but they change and you keep taking different ones. And eventually, because of all the different factors, maybe you don't pass one that you've passed a dozen times before. And so if we're talking about, is humanity undergoing some great tests right now? So let's take countries out of it. So we've talked about some examples of countries. Is humanity undergoing a great test? And I think there's a pretty obvious one.
I think there's several that affect not just, obviously our country, but affect everybody. And the few that I think of are how we treat our climate and how we handle medicine in the world and, scientific discoveries.
Well, let's talk about scientific discoveries, because I think climate is maybe can be seen as the obvious one, but I think there's some interesting stuff to talk about it. So with medicine, how do you see that?
Well, I mean, number one, there's always money attached to medicine. And so when you're looking at healthcare, when you're looking at manufacturing a pharmaceutical, there are costs associated with it, which are fine. Every cost should be covered at some point. But there's also a large profit margin in medicine. Not just pharmaceutical, but the whole insurance model is it's for profit, and there's a lot of obstruction to making sure your civilization, your society is healthy.
Well, that can be like, I'm not necessarily opposed to capitalism, so hopefully nobody misreads it this way, but that can be a problem in a hyper-capitalist society, is everybody assumes like the jig is going to be up at some point, so they're all just scrabbling on top of each other to try to get theirs while the getting's good.
Right.
And that can lead to some awesome things, but it can also lead to some really, really destructive tendencies where nobody's thinking long-term. Everybody's just thinking, well, I just got to make it for the next year, 5 years, 10 years, 50 years.
Right.
And who cares at that point?
I don't want to get too personally political into this, but I see healthcare as the same weight as defense, as the same weight as infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Like, if you want to live in a society, those are things that are important to everybody, right? You want to feel like you're safe. You're not going to be attacked from foreign invaders. You're not going to be attacked by, just anybody on the street, because, there are systems in place for consequences for that. That's something that humanity has said, okay, we are going to collectively say, this isn't right. We're not going to let you just walk up and hit somebody and get away with it. The same thing with the country. We're not going to just let somebody come in and just take over all the land and, start killing people. We're going to provide defense for that. To me, I see healthcare as that should be something we should all be aspiring to have an equal playing field and to have, not necessarily, I don't want to use the word right because I don't want to make it seem like, people just go to the emergency room for whatever they feel like, but basic needs being met. If I'm going to pay money, if I'm going to pay taxes into a system, I want to get certain things out of it.
Well, I think part of the problem or the challenge with healthcare is that we already solved so many other problems that made healthcare a problem. Like, it didn't used to matter that much what your health was like when you were 80 because a war or famine or breaking your leg or the flu would have killed you a long time ago, right? Like,
right.
Our population used to get thinned out, but humanity, if you want to look at it through this lens, humanity passed all those tests.
Right. It's been growing.
Right. We developed vaccines. We came up with ways to make agriculture spread farther. We figured out ways to fix most common medical issues. We figure out ways to do all this stuff. And then at the end, you start getting harder and harder tests. I think that's just the way it goes, is now we're getting to the point where we can fix most of this stuff on a technical level, or we can fix a lot of this stuff. We just don't know how to do it sustainably. And have we reached, are we on a bell curve? Have we reached the zenith, and are we cresting over the other side now where we've engineered ourselves into a corner where we can't support the level of comfort that we've been able to figure out how to get? Which is it's kind of an interesting thing that we could back ourselves into a corner by our innovation. It's also kind of a sad thing. In the same way as climate change, of course, and not that we need to switch over and talk about that one right now, but you could make the case that we're not trying to destroy the climate. We've just discovered all these natural resources, and will we be able to figure out where to get more of them before we've exhausted everything this planet has now?
Right.
Because we weren't wrong to use natural resources we found, right? Like, why wouldn't you? If you can use them to improve the world for everybody. But let's say we never advanced past the 1700s, or let's say the early 1900s. Let's say we never advanced past the early 1900s technologically. Well, we're eventually going to use up all those resources, and then what do we do? We have to innovate new ways to take care of ourselves. We have to pass tests as we come up with resource shortages or new wars or whatever, new technological discoveries. And if we pass enough of them, we're okay. If we don't pass enough of them, the earth runs out of resources. I think it's the same. It's really true with the medical field. I mean, we fix so many things so we can live for so long now. But what if we've just reached a wall where we can't fix it any more than it's fixed now?
Again, I don't personally have a problem with capitalism. I think there are certain things that work really well when you're competing for innovation. I think there are other things that work even better for innovation when you are collaborating. And I think that when you have redundancies in resources, so you have 10 different competing companies trying to come up with a better depression medication versus collaboratively trying to come up with ways to solve deeper, health problems that we haven't figured out how to deal with yet. We haven't solved AIDS yet. I mean, we're getting close, I think. There's been promising studies, but they're not even close to clinical trial. I'll get back to the collaboration part, because I think that's a bigger issue, and I think that'll ultimately be humanity's great test. Can we actually collaborate as a species, and not? Yeah, I'll get back to that.
Okay, sure.
But yeah, I think there's so many hurdles to developing new medications, to getting proper care. And I'm not saying that, I don't know. We're spending all this money into our taxes. I would like to see some that benefit me and my health.
Well,
honestly.
And you do, to be fair, you see a lot of it benefit your health right now, but you don't feel like you're getting your money's worth. Is that fair?
Well, no, I pay health insurance. I pay also for Medicare for when I get older. But those are two separate things. I'm paying, with my insurer, or my employer is paying too, to get me insured. But my tax money doesn't necessarily go towards that, other than, regulation or, whatever lobbyist concessions that are made with my tax money.
Again, not to turn this into a super political thing, I think it's so stupid that health insurance is tied to employment. Even if we were paying the exact same amount, if it's going to come out of somewhere, I'd rather get paid the extra money and have it come out of my taxes, and not have the quality of your insurance tied to the whims or the quality of your employer so much, because that just is an untenable, unsustainable situation, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But
and there are other ways that are not socialized medicine that seem to be working okay. I mean, they have, I can't remember the word, something. Clearly I'm prepared and got notes in front of me. I think there are smarter ways to do it. There are components of capitalism that work against us, I think. When you're paying $100 for some ibuprofen at a hospital, when you get an MRI and you're paying thousands and thousands of dollars for it, that's cost prohibitive. That's cost prohibitive to being able to, I know the ibuprofen they kind of just give you while you're there, but if I need an MRI, I don't know if I'd go get another MRI anytime soon, because I know how much it costs after my insurance. And I know that there are costs in developing the equipment, but again, those cost so much because of the profit model that's attached to healthcare.
Well, so question for you. I don't know if there's a question or not. So I think you can make the case again that it's because we get these new technological innovations, and that accelerates the speed at which we improve ourselves, but it also accelerates the speed at which we are going to encounter the next test. Meaning, we discover fossil fuels, massive jolt to the world economy, right? Things become possible, which you never thought were going to be possible. Undoubtedly, much of our progression over the last 200 or 300 years is because of fossil fuels. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Okay. But the problem is adding that jolt to our civilization also accelerates how quickly we're hurting it.
Right.
So we innovate a lot. We move ahead really, really fast. We also accelerate our risk. And I think the same is true of healthcare. The faster and faster we move and the more stuff we fix, the farther we dig ourselves into this hole where we can't pay for it. And we don't know how to get out. And I mean, there's ways we probably can get out. It's not like there's no way to get out, but it makes it harder and harder to do it. If healthcare was easy, we would have fixed it a long time ago. I truly believe it isn't a purely partisan thing. There's a lot of partisanship to it, and there's a lot of politics to it. But if there was some simple...
I think that's part of the problem, too. Politics is one of the major obstructors of getting anything done.
Absolutely. But
on both sides, not just a side that's saying, no, we don't want that type of healthcare.
Right. Absolutely. But it's also, if it was easy, I think we probably would have gotten there before, right?
I don't know that that's true.
Really?
In this case, because there's, and I don't want to get conspiratorial, but there's so much lobbying money behind every politician. And there's constituents that you have to please. And that's not saying that they go there and think, I don't want to solve this problem because I'm going to get money. But
right, but at the end of every day,
I don't want to go and piss off my constituents that are giving me hundreds of $1,000s for my campaign and giving to my party for a campaign. So I'm not going to necessarily, bite the hand that feeds me.
Well, again, that goes back to one of the problems you have in a hyper-capitalist society is everybody's trying to get theirs, because I think it's deep down inside, people know it's not going to last. And not like I'm always trying to reframe things as humanity's great test, but that is the topic. And I think deep down, everybody knows that this won't work forever. Whether it's because they die or they aren't able to do it anymore, or it's because humanity itself no longer has this as an option. I think everybody deep down knows that selfishness is really just guaranteeing that they'll be okay if everything
Right.
goes belly up in the meantime. And
Yep.
that's a survival instinct. Like, that's not even a bad thing necessarily. That's just, it can have bad repercussions the way it gets implemented.
It's an old survival instinct.
Right. That doesn't suit
And
us very well now.
I want to get back to that later in this conversation.
Okay.
Because I have an overall theory as to why we suck.
What's wrong with us? The story.
So moving it from the medical, I guess, to the global climate change, or whether you believe in climate change or not, I personally think the data is there. Whether or not you think it's there, it's still our home. And while we may not be ready to implode tomorrow, there's still some nasty cities to live in with pollution, and there are better ways to do, business. I don't know many people that are getting sick from solar panels.
well,
I know plenty of people that get sick from carbon monoxide and
fracking
other
and
pollutants.
whatever else. But I think you're starting to see that, though, because again, I want to give credit where credit's due. People fight it for a long time, and then gradually people start coming around once technology matures to a point where it becomes a better deal than a pie in the sky. Wouldn't it be awesome if we did blank? And now you're seeing companies like, was it Exxon or GE or somebody? Like, there are companies now that used to be all fossil fuel lobbying. Like, that was their deal. And now they're investing hundreds of millions of dollars into green energy because they're starting to see, like, okay, this is probably where things are actually going. We need to be on board. And
Right, but
that's the question is,
but you got to look at that motivation. That's where we're going, so we should get on board.
Right.
It's not, this is the right thing to do, let's move our company there. There are companies that do that on their own without saying, okay, this is going to play better with our markets.
true.
This is going to make people buy our products more. It's
True, but you also, I mean, that's my point is, even if they do a bad job of it, so eventually they get on board. The question is, does everybody get on board in time? Like, it isn't the end of the world, which is kind of a dark joke to make in this conversation, but it's not the end of the world if it takes everybody a little while to get on board. It's not great, but also got to think plenty of things come along that aren't the solution, and it's good everybody didn't get on board. So I don't think it's the end of the world if people don't get on board. It's potentially the end of the world if people don't get on board in time if they should have.
right.
And that it's not
But
always easy to know
what
that.
is in time? I
I
mean,
don't
if
know.
you
Are we already past it?
And if you're on a bus that's going down towards a cliff, you only have so much time to stop, and it doesn't feel like you're at the edge, so you don't feel like you need to stop yet. But there comes a point where you literally cannot stop that bus, even though you're still really far away from the cliff's edge.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I don't want to turn this political.
Well, I think we've said that.
I apologize for everybody who disagrees.
Well, I think we've
but
said it. We think we've said we don't want to turn it political enough that we can just, we can unload a little bit.
Let's just turn it political.
Well, anybody who disagrees is already disagreeing, and anybody who understands
Yeah.
where we're coming from, they don't need us to tell them. So
Okay, cool. I have issues with clean coal.
well,
I have
I don't
issues
think clean
with
coal is really a thing.
I have issues with 30% import tariffs on solar energy. That is a step to me. That is a step away from where everybody else is attempting to go.
Well, again, I think that comes back to people trying to get in on it on multiple different levels, and one of those levels is tax the people doing the thing.
Right. But then it becomes prohibitive, and then it's not. And again, this is not humanity. This is a country that I'm speaking about. But our country will have bigger barriers to making that innovative step. And so either companies are going to stop exporting to us or export less, or companies that are here are going to move away and say, you know what, you guys don't believe in what we're moving towards, so we're going to ship our operations elsewhere. That would be if I had a company, if I owned Solar City, or Tesla, I would say, I don't know if I could operate here. And I mean, I understand the ability to influence people. There comes a point where you feel like your cause is greater than the beliefs around you. You know what I mean?
Well, you want it to be, but then reframing things as being part of a great test, what if everybody doesn't agree? How do you get people to agree that no, this is it? Like, this is something we have to do, rather than this is something that I believe strongly in and I want to convince you of it. Because that's where humanity doesn't get along, right? Like, we have plenty of people who are very passionate about many things, and this sounds like it's the stupidest oversimplification, but like, we've got loads of people who are passionate about stuff. That's not a problem.
Right.
Getting people to agree on what are the right things to be passionate about and what's really worthy of our time and attention, that's really difficult.
Right.
And I don't know what the answer is.
It's easier to define the problem than to recommend the solutions.
Yeah.
I can recommend what I think is ideal,
But you don't
but
know.
getting from there to, well, I've got ideas of what I think would work out.
Yeah, but we don't know. I mean, just to be fair, like, we don't know it'll work. Like, a lot of people can solve our problems on paper. Execution's a lot harder.
Execution just takes effort. I think ideas can be conceived and right without being fully implemented.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Well, the way I see it is, no, I think execution is the hardest thing. I think.
No, I'm not saying it's not hard. I'm just saying that it can be right without the actual execution happening. Like, you can know what things are going to work in some circumstances without executing.
Right. Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm following you. Yes, I believe you can. But I mean, it's
Otherwise we wouldn't have innovation. We wouldn't have, because a lot of invention is, I have this idea, I'm going to work hard to make sure it works correctly. I'm going to put it out there and it's going to work. And when it does work, everybody, cheers and hoorah.
Yeah, but how many of those people fail over and over and over again before they ever get to the thing that works? I mean, isn't that the story of like every famous inventor? Like, you occasionally get the person who just stumbles across brilliance somewhere and they're like, oh, and they become a millionaire.
You're failing at details. You're not failing at concepts. So you have the idea that's going to work, and then you work out the details of getting it right. So I mean, if you look at the invention of electricity, it was theoretical before it was practical, and it might not have been perfect for a long time, but it did ultimately come to fruition. So I think ideas can be born that are the right way to go. It just, you've got to iron out the small details. I think of, us trying to get to Mars. You could say, no, it's not going to happen, too hard, too much radiation in space. But there are people, there are companies, there's SpaceX, there's Boeing, they're saying, no, we're going to get people to Mars. And they know the idea is going to work. They just have to work out the details. And, tie that into, we can solve energy. We know what the right way to do it is. We've got to figure out the small details to get it on mass scale, to get better storage.
Right. And that's our test is, can we solve can we solve humanity's problems in getting that technology out to everyone before we run out of the alternative? Like, do we pass the test of, great, we know what to do now, but it's not as simple as, sweet, everybody switch over to solar, right? Like, even now that most of the world seems to be getting on board with this, there's still plenty of people who are like, okay, great, but we got to make the best use out of the fossil fuels while we still have them, right? Like, we're not just going to give them up. We got them. Let's keep using them. And then there's other people going, all right, well, this is great, but I can't afford it yet, so I'll get on board when it's at a different price point. And then there's people who don't have access to it, which is a lot of people, honestly. Like, solar is great, but for many people, solar is kind of a toy. in the sense that
Right.
I can't go out tomorrow and go, oh, I want to convert to solar and then run my entire life off solar. I can't do it's literally impossible unless
Right.
I restructure my whole life around that.
But
Currently.
the difference is, if you can see the merit in it and see that it is something we should be moving towards, you're going to allow more resources to be pushed towards that. And you're going to hopefully help remove any obstacles that keep that from happening. Versus, well, I can't do anything about it, so let's just status quo. You figure it out whenever you figure it out. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing.
Well, I mean, isn't that what
It's the societal attitude that affects it off. I mean, I know there's the technical part of innovation, but there's also you've got to have your society behind it, or you're only going to move at snail's pace.
is it that? Is it that, or is it that feeling of helplessness where like, all right, so I'll use me as an example because no one can get mad at me using me. I believe in solar. I think it's the future. I also can't immediately switch my life over to run off solar right now. Like, my power company doesn't offer that as an option. You just tick a box and get, and
Right.
I don't have enough. I don't own the house I live in, and I don't have enough room to install solar panels in my area to power everything I do. Right. So like realistically, I cannot currently switch my entire life over to solar unless I build my life around that. And maybe it's because of that, I'm not really taking any steps towards it. I'm just thinking in the back of my mind, well, one day when it's more accessible, obviously I'll do it because I believe in it. But I'm not helping get there now. I mean, I could buy like
No,
stocks.
but you are part of a collective.
But I am, but I don't want to. I'm not going to pat myself on the
attitude.
head.
No. I'm not saying that.
Like I guess
Look at Jeremiah. He's going to solar rallies.
the biggest
and
way
stuff.
I can vote is solar rally. It's called being outside. No, the biggest way I can help is like voting for people who believe that way, right? Like, I'm not saying anything you do is worthless. Don't bother. I'm saying I know what the answer is. I could be doing things that I'm not doing now. I'm not helping us pass the test. I'm waiting to see if other people are going to get the right answers. And then I'm going to copy off them. I feel like this analogy is being stretched a little thin, but like, I could be doing a lot more than I'm doing, and I'm choosing not to because I don't want to. Or maybe it's because I'm scared that I won't be able to.
I think, though, there's a difference between, I don't think you're apathetic to it, but you're just not in a position to do anything about it. There's a difference, though, between the I can't do anything about it at this level, but there's a certain level where, yes, it starts becoming, your apathy does matter. I'm not saying you're apathetic, but when people become apathetic as a politician, as a company, or even worse, when they become resistant, that's when it affects everybody. And your level, you get a car that's more fuel efficient, great. You're at least working towards curbing some of the dependency in the meantime. So that's a really small thing. But again, your place in this as a citizen is voting and living responsibly. It's not necessarily converting your whole house to solar and going to rallies. Mm-hmm. There are people that do that, and I fully appreciate people that believe in causes enough to go to rallies.
Well, I believe in causes, but I don't believe in rallies.
Okay. I mean,
I'm speaking from a place of American
honestly.
privilege here, but I don't. At least where I live, rallies don't really have a lot of positive effect.
But when you get to the political level, that's where you kind of hold all the cards. Mm-hmm. Of, do we make a path? Do we make a path for a better medical life, or do we stay at status quo, or even just play to our constituents? And I think that's a hindrance on both sides. I think that apathy. I mean, there are people that are truly concerned about our environment and moving towards sustainable energies. But they're taking the common person's attitude of, well, they'll figure it out at some point. Then we'll move over to that, as opposed to, okay, let's figure out our plan to keep ourselves, keep our not our lifestyle, our standard of living where it's at, while at the same time coming off of fossil fuels and moving towards this. That has to be an adopted attitude to really move it forward as a society. Otherwise, it's a luxury for the rich.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can believe in stuff and you can make changes, but when something's cost prohibitive, it's just people who have the money to be able to really say, look at me, I believe in complete solar energy or XYZ.
Well,
So it's not, I don't think it's our job to jump out tomorrow and come up with ways to do running water or electricity at our house.
I did a little bit of Googling, and currently right now, for an average house, the price to convert to solar is somewhere probably around $18,000. Assuming you have access to like enough sunlight and everything else. Like assuming you meet the prerequisites, 18 grand. Which sounds great, but
Not everybody has $18,000.
right, is it really
around.
practical to do that? Like again, that's where it's easy for us to sit and go like, well, I believe in it, but I'm going to wait while
But as a new home buyer, are we buying traditional homes? And 99% of the time, yes. Because builders don't feel the need to move that because we as a market will buy what they give us. And that we aren't saying, hey, there really is a demand for solar panels or solar tiles on a house, so make it happen and we'll buy your homes. Maybe where people can afford it, but until it becomes a global scale, it's not, the affordability is, it's going to get tough to get down.
Mm-hmm.
Although I think we're getting, maybe not in the next 10 years, maybe not 20 years, 30 years, maybe, where it could be affordable for every home.
Oh, I think within the next 20 years, certainly. Affordable for every home. Well, and that's only one way to solve it. Again, we're kind of rabbit trailing a little bit. That's only one way to solve it. Another way to solve it is the electric grid just starts switching over to using more solar, and you get your electricity the traditional way, right? Everybody doesn't have to put solar panels in their house.
Right.
There are plenty of ways for the electrical grid to sustain itself in a better way and then give back. So, maybe that's how we solve energy, right? Here's one: overpopulation. Let's get to some sci-fi dystopian things. So the two big sci-fi dystopian, or I think the two big sci-fi dystopian things are, no, there's three. There's three. Do we create technology that replaces us? And so humanity fails the test there.
I think it's wholly possible.
Do we replace the need for workers, but not come up with a way to take care of workers? Which I think is a very real possibility.
I think that's, and again, yeah.
So, and then the last one would be, do we fill up or otherwise destroy the earth before we have a better option? Because I don't believe the birth rate is slowing down or bell curving. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No,
Right?
not at all.
And the climate isn't getting better. You can debate about to what degree it's getting worse. And I do think there is something to be said that I think humanity is very good at adapting if they're good at anything. And I bet we could adapt for a lot longer than people think. But at what cost? And there's eventually an end to all that. And if our solution is, well, we'll just keep adapting, well, eventually we fail.
Well, here's the thing with adapting. What's acceptable for adapting? We still have humans on the earth. Is that acceptable for adaptation?
Yeah, did we pass? We got 5,000 people living in the middle of the Colorado mountains.
We lost a third of the planet's people due to, polar ice caps melt, new viruses or old viruses were released, and we just didn't have immunity to them. I mean, there's any number of scenarios where you could just wipe out a large portion of humanity and say, well, we're still alive. Yeah, but you kind of lost. I mean, we get devastated over, a tsunami takes out thousands of people, like many, many thousands. Wars take out millions of people, hundreds of millions. what happens when a catastrophic event takes out in the billions? I mean, do we consider that, like as you said, passing the test? Is that because there are some left? Half the population, say half the population. Still, half the population is still a lot of people on this planet, considering historically how few we had, a couple thousand years ago.
It's true. Yeah, I mean, maybe that is passing. Like oh man, that sounds very morbid to say, but but I mean, it's true. Passing doesn't mean everybody passes.
Right.
It means humanity passes. And that's sad, but that's kind of how it's always been.
So let me ask you, in your ideal mindset, what would be passing for humanity? Not on a necessarily specific issue, but across the board. What would you say is not just we're doing a bad job, but we're passing. We're doing okay. We're doing a good job.
To which thing?
What would the criteria be for you?
For which thing though? Which problem?
All of it, all
of
across the board. So kind of a snapshot of humanity doing actually a good job, not just.
All right. So if you look at our progress in a certain area, let's say it's a graph. Instead of being a bell curve, if it exponentially increases and then tapers, is it able to then slowly increase or maintain the taper indefinitely? So like, I guess so a hypothetical example, let's say climate change, and there's a lot of theories that certain parts of the planet will be unlivable within 50 years that people currently live in. Like actually, literally impossible. Humanity cannot live here. So let's say we can move people around for a while without probably affecting the population to a significant amount, right? Like more people will die in those areas
to a small degree, because
to a small degree, but more people will.
When you look at something like Katrina, many people died because they did not have the means to get out of the city, whether it was through transportation or, they just literally financially had no place to go.
Right, but
so they had to ride out the storm.
But in the grand scheme of things, I'm saying that's relatively minor. And again, it's very morbid to say it that way, but in the grand scheme of things, that's minor. And we could have minor, quote unquote, minor events like that probably for a long time. And people would adapt, right? Like people would be dying in those events, but we'd probably still outpace them in people being born. So it's a problem we could, if we were trying to solve the problem and the world population is still slowly going up, even as terrible, terrible things are happening and tens of millions of people are dying. And then eventually we find, let's say, another planet. So let's assume in this scenario, we've done too much damage to planet Earth. For good reasons, bad reasons, things that we did, things that weren't our fault, like a combination of all of it, Earth is no longer livable. But let's say we're able to maintain that long enough and the population slowly goes up and we are able to start moving people to Mars and the moon or whatever. Although when the Earth goes, the moon's probably in for a rough landing. But
well, not necessarily.
I was joking. But
that was a bad joke, but that's okay.
But so let's say, and then so the world population never dips a significant amount. It goes up, it maintains, and then it keeps going as humanity moves to the stars. I would say in that hypothetical situation, that's passing. You could also be passing with a worse grade. Let's say it goes up, we come back halfway down the bell curve, humanity gets down to the last 1.5 billion people. It takes us longer to figure out the answer. We finally get to Mars, we get to another planet. And we survive with, let's say, 750 million people. Well, we passed. Humanity's saved, but...
So in these scenarios, though, the technology and the resources to, say, terraform Mars versus fixing whatever problems we have with our planet, do you think they outweigh? I mean... We're talking about currently at current speed, something that takes like years to get to a planet. So this is not just, this is something you have to plan many, many years in advance. So say we can stave off, the Earth going down the toilet for 150 years. Do you think humanity has that kind of resolve to say, okay, we could just put all our resources into surviving here for now because we want to put our resources into ourselves? Or are they going to say, we're going to die out here, but let's go ahead and start setting up for the next 100 years? I mean, I think that's where we're at now, is we don't think ahead. There are some people that think ahead,
or
but
not enough of us think ahead in the same way, I think is how I would describe it.
We don't think ahead more than 20 years, 30 years. We don't think 200 years from now,
Do you think
300,
that's because
500,000.
the people making the rules about thinking ahead aren't going to be around 20, 30 years from now? And that's how far they think ahead?
But I feel like if we ever got in that scenario where, say things did start going catastrophic on our planet, I still think we might have that same mentality of let's protect ourselves. Let's protect the ones that can afford to be protected. Let's not protect the future of a race. And so I guess my underlying, what I was alluding to is I think we are so mentally tribalistic still. I mean, we've come a really far way technologically in the last few hundred years, but thousands of years. We went from simple tools to things that can think on their own without human input. I mean, we've come a long way, but there's always going to be that wall that we hit because it's all about me. It's all about who I can protect around me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the tribalistic mentality is we do some collaboration like with the International Space Station, and we have trade with other countries, but it's not as common as it needs to be to see, hey, you got a space program, I got a space program, let's put our space programs together and figure out how to solve a big problem. It's who can solve this smaller problem first. You know what I mean? I mean, we do have some partnerships where we use radio telescopes from other countries, and there is that understanding, but there's never. We don't solve planet issues. We don't solve human race issues. We solve country issues, and we solve individualized issues. And I think that to me is the biggest prohibitive component of any problem we ever try to solve. And even in a country, you still have, if you talk about the United States, you keep whittling down. Well, my state, we want to use our resources here. Well, my city, we want to, do this. My, district, we want to do. I mean, it just, or my family, I don't want to do that because my family, da-da-da. Not that there's anything wrong with family. I love my family more than anything in the world. But at some point, if we're ever going to solve some of these big issues, and I think that'll be the ultimate humanity test, is can we move past our own competition? Can we move past our own ability to sell, to feel like we have to survive? So there's
solve. Two ways to look at it. Like there's two different ways to see that. You can see it as the Star Trek utopian ideal of all humanities together, and of course there's aliens in Star Trek, bad example. But humanity's all together as one unified front now, and we can conquer anything because we're together. And on one hand, in theory, that's true, right? You remove the need to have wars. You remove, there's still going to be some violence. There is in every country, but you remove the need to have wars. You remove a lot of the political squandering of resources. Think how much we could accomplish. Then there's the flip side of that, which I think is equally valid, is, well, who doesn't want to live in the New World Order? Most people don't, right? Like everybody has that fear of a dystopian, overreaching government that takes over the whole world and you have no options. And both are probably equally fantastical and equally unlikely to actually happen. But do we need one of those?
I think we need one of those two. Are you saying one of those?
Yeah.
Like,
do we need one of the? I mean, is that what we need? Like, you think that's what gets us there? Is we need to put aside the countries? Because even within a country, politics tear people apart.
That's what I'm saying. You can still keep whittling down to tribalism. My tribe is my country. My tribe is my continent. My tribe is my state. My tribe is what school I went to. My tribe is my neighborhood or my family. Again, you should always meet the needs of those around you, but you can't solve global issues with small pockets of opinion. It's got to be collective at some point. There are going to be some issues that are big enough, and those two movies are brought up at the beginning. Imagine if, say, take Independence Day. So say an alien invasion happened and everybody did their problem solving the same way they do now. So the states have their own idea of whether they should be handling local enforcement. The countries individually will fight their part of aliens, but I'm not going to go over to yours and help yours because, us first. If we solve every problem like we're just worrying about our tribe, we're ultimately all the tribes are going to fall. I think that, to me, that is what humanity's test is going to be, is can we put aside our own selfishness? Again, still looking for ourselves, but there's a difference between caring about yourself and overreaching your self-preservation. Mm-hmm. I would love to see an ideal future. My ideal future is one where we work less, we play more, we still enjoy creating, we still enjoy the things that we do, the pursuits of knowledge, but we're just not working as hard because either we're collaborating, so we're spreading our resources out better, and we're creating it, it's hard to project 1,000 years because we don't know. Nobody 1,000 years ago could have predicted we are where we are, technologically. Mm-hmm. So maybe in the future, nobody needs to work for their basic needs because we have artificial intelligence that can do all that can farm for us, that can, do home repairs, that can do all the stuff we need, and we can just appreciate our time on this planet. But those things would never get achieved if eventually people just don't stop saying, what's the best life we could be living if we really had an option?
But couldn't a lot of us take steps towards that now?
I mean, I think there are people that are doing that. And again, I know some people don't agree with Elon Musk, his businesses, but I appreciate some of his just being an example of, you make an electric car and you release the what's the word? The source code for it. So here you go. This should be available for everybody. You build your own electric cars off of it. Mm-hmm. And companies have done that. Or, you know what? Let's get to space for cheap. Let's find a way to cut all the costs so we can, explore more. I mean, there are people that are doing things and making a lot of money doing it, but it's also the right thing to do. I honestly think that Elon Musk could make more money just playing the game that everybody else plays.
Make more money if you deliver the cars on time.
Well, that's true. But that's a part of innovation, though, is when it's easier to make cars that have already been made than it is to start from the ground up and make new. I mean, not everything is completely innovative, but assembly lines aren't built for that. They're built for different ways to build.
Well, so when I said, can't people take steps towards that? That's actually not what I meant, but I thought what you said was interesting. What I was specifically referring to was like people who put a lot of work in so they can retire early and live technically like below the poverty line, but they work very carefully to set themselves up with a life where that's enough. And then they can spend their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s doing what they want. Not perfectly, but they've kind of removed themselves from the rat race because there's two ways to do it. One is earn a ton of money. The second way is not need a lot of money. If you can find a easy way to sustain yourself, you're good, right? But you need to be able to sustain yourself at a comfortable standard of living. One of the easiest things to do is lower your comfortable standard of living.
But that's the best that a person can do in their lives now.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I was more referring to what's the best humanity can do
For everybody?
for the lives of its people. Is it making sure nobody dies of AIDS? Is it making sure that people aren't killing themselves, in mines to work? I mean, there are ways around it, but human labor's cheap, relatively. And there's more money to be made on products. I mean, they are, they're lab growing meat now. They're taking proteins from chicken. They're taking proteins from beef, any kind of animal you could want. You could literally grow lab meat. It's cost prohibitive right now, but the cost is been cut significantly. Are we going to say, let's just keep doing the status quo, or...
Well, I think that's one where
could we come up with a solution?
You provide a better solution. I think most people won't care and they'll switch to it, right? Like, it'll take time, but they'll do it. Like,
I don't know.
I think if you could, well, maybe I'm just being bullish, but
do you think that Tyson's Chicken's going to say, yeah, we'll switch over? Or are they going to say, no, let's not have that on the market? That's
they'll
blah, blah, blah.
probably do that, and then they'll eventually try some, and it'll sell well, and then they'll start switching, and gradually their business moves over slowly. I mean, I think that's normally how it goes. So would it be nice if they
something like that? Something like that solves a grand scale if you can get it working right.
Yeah, but they don't want it. They don't want it solved. See, here's another problem where we hurt ourselves as humanity: is they don't want to solve it quicker than they can adapt to it. Right? Like, they might be on board with it from day one, but they know that their business will go under if they go all in on it. So they want to ease in over time so they can adapt and change, which, as far as being a business is concerned, I mean, they have a fiduciary duty to their shareholders and to they have a duty to the people that work for them. Like, it's in their interest to keep their business afloat, and that's not wrong by itself. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But that means that they probably won't go full in. Like, it would be great if they did. But then that's true of everybody. Nobody wants to be the farthest out in front of everyone as far as a business is concerned when it comes to risk, right? You don't want to be in the riskiest position in the room unless it also is the most profitable, which offsets some of the risk. So nobody really wants to be in that position where they're all in. They want other people to be more in and they're right behind them, or they're right with them so that the risk is mitigated, and then they're good. I don't think that's wrong either.
But I see innovation as, I hate using analogies all the time, but I see it as like a dam with a big thing of water behind it. And I see innovation as like squirts of water that happen behind the floodgate. But if you really wanted, to move forward, you need all the water to move forward kind of at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but water's really powerful and it'll erode the dam till it bursts.
It will. But that's where when you get people on board and you start planning out your infrastructure, then you can start moving, at an equal pace across the board versus, well, let me move forward and I'll see if I can pull everybody with me. Oh, I finally got one person to rubber band a little bit past me, but it's all resistant. And I don't think it's necessarily always cost prohibitive, as in society can't handle it. It's we just don't want to be uncomfortable to make, the right things happen.
I think a lot of that's just because people don't feel like they can actually do it. Right? Like everybody, no one drop feels like it's responsible for the flood. And most people don't feel like they're going to be able to be out in front of everyone being a champion of one thing or another. And most people probably don't want that. Right? Yeah. Like being on the cutting edge is kind of tiring. Or can be. So, I don't really like judge somebody who doesn't want that. Like you can't help what you want and don't want in life. You can influence it, but we're all different. And I try to be careful not to judge anyone for not being in the same place that I think they should be in.
Yeah.
Because I've got reasons why I think they should be there, but they might completely disagree with me and they value things that I'm not even aware of. So,
but the difference is, though, there's a difference between judging somebody as in you suck as a person because you think this, and saying, I think you're wrong and this is why I think what I think is right. I think judging is just shutting them down, explaining why they might be wrong and explaining what you think is a better option, at least gives them the power to think about it. They might not think about it, but every major change of any kind of thought pattern in your life that's changed, any kind of major shift in your worldview, it might have been based on something you just learned, but usually it's something that's been festering and something that just builds, and you just little pieces keep happening over and over and over, and then finally you're just like, you know what? I'm shifting. People shift that way with politics. They shift that way, with their religious beliefs. It's not just always oh man, I never thought of that. Okay, well I believe this now.
Right.
It's taking that thought and just, I may hate somebody at the time when they tell me something that I don't agree with them at all with. Generally, I don't hate them, but, I might be pissed at them or whatever. But, you never can take away the value of what I thought about 2 months later, a year later, 5 years later. Like, man, I remember when this person said this. And I've been thinking about this subconsciously every time I encounter the situation. And now I know why it affects me this way. So, I mean, there is the power to judge and there's the power to influence. And influence doesn't... I think people mistake influence of, I tell you something and you're convinced on the spot. And I don't think that's how influence works at all.
No, you win people over, like you convince people. You add people to your tribe. So not always in a good way.
But you may never ever know that you've influenced them that way, though. Mm-hmm. So, and again, it could be 10 years. It could be a week later. I mean, just I look back where I was 10 years ago in, many different areas of my thinking to where I am now. And I look back at the little teeny tiny nuggets of just, it could be even a phrase that someone said that I just mulled over for years and didn't know why. I don't know. I think that's part of how change works too, is we may not have the big part of, going in and like voting on something or, spending money at a $1 million or $1 billion scale. But we, start getting people to think more consciously about the world around them. Then I think that's a step. That's a step we can, take. That's not, killing ourselves to do it.
So let's wind down in like a constructive way here, or maybe a constructive way. why don't you pick one of what you think is humanity's challenges or humanity's tests that we're going through right now? How would you solve it on paper? So let's assume you can get everybody on board.
Just one problem.
Let's assume you can. Well, yeah, let's assume all the other restrictions are done. So if you solve it on paper, you solve the problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pick one.
I think food would be one for me. That I think is.
All right. What specifically about food? The quality of our food, like what our food does to us, what the food does to the world, how much food we have. Like, what specifically would you want to solve?
A little bit of all of that.
Okay.
So I mentioned lab-grown meat. Mm-hmm. I think it has the potential to be one of the biggest innovations in humanity.
Wouldn't it be easier for everybody just to switch off of meat and eat vegetarian?
Not necessarily, because we're not getting the very specific proteins.
Yeah, you can.
Well, you can, but it is a lot harder. But it's that's just one component of it. But for the people who are eating meat and need a certain amount of protein, I think that without a lot of the, you're not dealing with hormones, you're not dealing with any of the sicknesses that goes around in, the different animals that we eat. We're also not dealing, it solves more problems. It solves the amount of resources that it takes to farm animals, to take the global, like the environmental factor, because one of the biggest parts of pollution also is having cattle, having the amount of land, and just the amount of land you have to tear down to build large farms. And then they have to be grass fed. So it's a cycle that you're kind of getting out of. But that to me is just one component. It's finding a way to solve the problem is helping with some poverty issues too. I think poverty has three basic components. It's where are you going to live, what are you going to eat, and how are you going to stay alive? Mm-hmm. I mean, I know eating and staying alive is kind of similar, but healthcare is part of, something that is really affected by, poverty. And you can say, well, people who are extreme poverty get healthcare. Well, maybe in this country, but not every country. But by eliminating some of that financial burden, you're causing people to worry less or less stressed. You can ensure a certain amount of nutrition. I mean, you can't force people to eat, but you're providing a baseline of everybody has this certain amount of vitamins and, different minerals and stuff that your body needs. I think that takes away a large component of why it's tough to be a human. And we're not animals that are in the wild that are going out and competing against a few. We're billions of people trying to figure out ways to pay for food. And I know it seems like, food's not that much of an expense in my, my monthly budget, but for some people it is real. It's a real struggle. I mean, I don't want to get into wages, but people that are just barely able to afford a place to put over their head, and then they're trying to figure out how to pay for their food on top of that. Mm-hmm. So I think solving that problem is going to solve a large portion of,
So to solve it, you want lab grown meat and it to be
lab-grown
super
meats.
cheap.
I want super cheap. Personally, my ideal future would be robotic run farms. I know people say, well, that's going to run the farmers out of business.
No, the farmers are kind of been out of business for decades. They just subsidize it to keep them up.
There's still things to do. But if you're solving one problem, you're not. Why are farmers working to pay for their house and for them to eat? So you're lessening their burden too. But I mean, I'm not talking about the next 10 years. I'm talking about 100 years, 200 years from now. If we're not working the grounds, we're not, killing ourselves just to stay alive, which is, And I know that sounds really dramatic. As the average American is not killing themselves to stay alive. I mean, there are countries that are literally you're putting yourself at risk to get food. But, it's still, is it necessary? And is it the best way? Is it the best for humanity? On top of meat, people are very skeptical of GMOs. I don't think the science is there to say they're negative in any way. I think that finding ways to solve climate problems, being able to grow certain things where you live and making them grow, especially in arid countries, I think that, also solves extreme poverty, in places like Africa. I mean, I know there's other problems that are causing the poverty, like, corruption. But again, that, you're talking about solving all the other problems around it. That's what I would do then.
All right.
How about you?
So I'll do energy then, because I don't know anything about it.
And I will say, I don't think that food is necessarily the biggest problem we have.
I said pick
crisis.
one. I just said pick one.
Yeah.
So we have a great test of, regardless of how you feel about fossil fuels, is one of the best ways that we power large portions of our world. Right? Like, we wouldn't be where we are without them. So you can hate them all you want, but right now we need them. But we have the crisis of they are most likely doing irreparable harm to the world. And they are most likely not going to be financially sustainable for a long period of time. Maybe longer than my life. So, hey, why do I care? But for a long period of time, probably not the future. So let's say we can get everybody on the same page. We're like, we have to pass this test of we have to keep growing as a society. We have to be preparing for things like overcrowding the earth and running out of food and whatever else. We need to solve energy. So solar is obviously a massive option. I would not push for most people adding it to their houses. I would push for it being added to new construction. So I do like the nice subtle approach, because I like things becoming a normal part of your life to the point where it's not a struggle to maintain it. So I'd want to add it to new construction. So like invest heavily in solar shingles or solar roofs. And then maybe don't retrofit existing houses that much. We obviously have huge amounts of land that could have solar farms set up on them. I would like a lot of that solar to be sold back through the grid. And if you build it into enough new construction, you can use that to help solve problems with grid infrastructure too. Not solve all of them. You introduce new problems, but you can use that to help offset a lot of it. So I see this happening over the next 30, 40 years. A lot of houses get replaced. Houses that don't get replaced get new roofs. They get solar panels. We add a lot more solar to the grid. We start taking the load off of energy that way. I think we should keep going on the fossil fuels. I think we should try to do it in the least environmentally destructive ways possible, but we should acknowledge that we've already done a lot of the damage. It's probably not a good time to sit on the high horse. we should probably use it to try to sustain ourselves while we try to get off of them, I think electric cars are a no-brainer, but that's a tiny, tiny portion of the electrical problems we have to solve. But I believe we'll get there, because we already solved the problem of what's electricity and can we use it? So I don't think electricity is going away anytime soon. We just need more. So massive investments in solar, keep burning the fossil fuels, and then just replace all fossil fuel subsidies over time in a gradual way so that the costs can be spread out and absorbed, and start spreading that over into benefiting renewable energies, which is kind of what people are doing now. But I'd get everybody on the same page and we stop fighting and having wars over oil, and then, we move a lot faster. I don't think it really makes a big difference for people to be buying LED bulbs for their houses. That's great, but that's not the big problem. In the same way that, people taking the carpooling is great, but cars are doing a tiny portion of the pollution that we're pumping out into the atmosphere. We got to solve that other ways first. So I kind of take a holistic, solve it everywhere you can. push everywhere you can, and then we drift there over time. And I would bet in America, I would say within 50 years, so conceivably within my lifetime, I bet we could be like 80% solar. At that point, like, say you get 80, 90% on a renewable energy, the fossil fuels aren't really doing as much damage, and you can extend them out for a very, very long period of time. But that's, at least on paper, not being an expert, that's probably what I would suggest.
Yeah.
And then if we can do that, it should only get cheaper, only get better. And if the sun ever goes out, we have bigger problems. So,
I mean, the sun goes out, there's nothing we could do.
Right. Well, unless we're in a different
this
solar system, that's a future humanity's great test.
Right.
So you say nothing. There is something. We're just not, probably not in our lifetimes are we going to get there. Unless, like, NASA discovers the God particle and all of a sudden we have faster than light drives, and in 5 years from now we have people going to Alpha Centauri. I'm not saying it won't happen, but likely that's not going to happen while I'm alive. Like, honestly, I'll be surprised if we have humans living on a base on Mars during my lifetime.
Yeah, I'm skeptical of that. I see us getting there. We haven't quite solved a lot of the problems.
Yeah, we haven't solved getting there. Forget, like, building a home there.
I mean, we could get there. It's just your body's going to be in such bad shape by the time you get there.
So what does everyone else think? Humanity's a great test. So food, energy, war, those are the big ones. What do you think we've passed? What do you think are ones that are coming up or that we're in the middle of that we haven't passed yet? And not to turn the light too far inwards, might be a good time to think about what tests have you passed? And what tests are you struggling with? Again, not to be too meta, not trying to make this too hokey, but everybody's in a different place, and everybody goes through stuff, and most of us pass, or we fail in ways that affect us one way or another and change our perspective on life and change our direction in life. So for me, it was kind of interesting since I first read or heard about this the first time. I like thinking about it as far as what is humanity going through, but it's also interesting to think about it from my own perspective of, like, what tests was I taking that I didn't know about? Like, when was I being tested that I wasn't aware, or I was aware and I passed, or I was aware and I failed, or vice versa? You have any other closing thoughts you want to give?
No, that was a really good ending. Very good final thoughts.
Well, thanks, James. You know what? At this point, statistically, most people don't make it all the way to the very end of anything that's put online. So this isn't complaining. Like, I don't take it personally. It's just how it is. I would want to know, what topics would other people want us to cover? Not saying we'll do it, but I'd be interested. I bet people could come up with some pretty thought-provoking topics that maybe James and I haven't thought of, or maybe we've thought of but never thought about talking about.
Or maybe we thought, they don't want to hear that.
That's true.
Yeah, also, I do want to say that if you disagree with us, please feel free to write in.
I think that's,
I would love to hear your thoughts.
And that's what.
Sorry,
go ahead.
Where we're wrong, or where you think we're wrong. Just don't tell us we're stupid. Call us stupid liberals or stupid this. Or it's just let's be
adults.
Let's be adults. Let's be what's the word? Productive in our dialogue.
Yes, that's one thing. Well, if I'll pat us on the head a little bit here, that's one thing I think you and I are very good at. We're very capable at having intellectual disagreements or strong intellectual differences with each other or with other people on things, and we can still have productive conversations about it, and we can still move forward.
Yep.
I guess we're very pragmatic, in my opinion. Or very pragmatic about many things. We're probably horribly emotional about other things and not pragmatic at all. But we feel like we're very pragmatic about a great many things. So please feel free to disagree with us in an intellectual way. And we'll probably enjoy talking with you about it, even if we completely disagree.
Yeah, that's all I got.
All right,
to say.
everybody. Thanks for coming out and being a part of the show. You can write in with your thoughts to casualshenanigans@gmail.com. Until next time, stay casual.